The Simic Combine is one of the 10 guilds in the plane of Ravnica. This guild features the colors blue and green. Simic seeks to improve Ravnica by preserving and improving the people and beasts that live there. Simic is known for splicing creatures together, typically combining different types of sea creatures or adding their features to elves, Vidalcan, or merfolk. In Ravnica Allegiance, many Simic cards feature an ability called Adapt. This ability allows you to put one or more +1/+1 counters on a creature when activated, as long as that creature has no +1/+1 counters on it. Many other cards in Ravnica Allegiance synergize with those +1/+1 counters, giving the adapted creatures additional abilities. The Simic Combine is led by Prime Speaker Vannifar, so I'm going to start by talking about her card. Prime Speaker Vannifar is an elf ooze wizard, the first of her kind. By power and toughness, she doesn't look all that strong, but her activated ability is where she really shines. This ooze has the same ability as Birthing Pod, but this ability is free to activate and it's attached to a creature. Vannifar is definitely going to be a hit new commander and a powerful contender in Standard. She can be used to take advantage of powerful enter-to-battlefield effects like Frilled Mystics or Water Trap Weavers, and then she can be used to find exactly the card you need. Her activated ability allows you to sacrifice a creature and search your library for a creature with a converted mana cost that is 1 higher than the card you cast. Converted mana cost is independent of color, so you could use this ability to go from a 3-drop creature in blue to any 4-drop. You could even turn that Water Trap Weaver I mentioned before into another Prime Speaker Vannifar. I'm not sure why you'd want to, but you could. You could even use Vannifar's ability to cheat out a card that has additional costs, like Demon of Catastrophes, which normally requires you to sacrifice a creature. In this case, Prime Speaker Vannifar, after you've sacrificed a 3-drop, can search for any 4-drop. It doesn't care that normally in order to cast it, you'd need to sacrifice a creature. You can just throw it down on a battlefield. Another interesting feature of this ability is that it circumvents counterspells that would stop you from casting a creature. However, the Simic thought of that, and they actually gave you a way to stop Vannifar's ability. Repudiate and Replicate reintroduces countering abilities back into standard Magic play. This card can stop Planeswalker ults, enchantment triggers, and pretty much everything else that isn't a card being played, and this includes Vannifar's ability. This is a split card, so the left side gives you that counter ability, but the right-hand side allows you to make a copy of a creature that you already have. As a warning, if your creature has any counters on it, they won't be copied. Copying a Hydrate Krasis just gives you a dead jellyfish. I can't imagine that smells very good. Speaking of the Hydrate Krasis, this new card is a Jellyfish Hydra Beast. When you cast this card, you get life, card draw, and a creature that has flying and trample. To get the most value out of your Hydrate Krasis, you're going to want to get as much mana as you can. Incubation Druid is a way to get a lot of mana fast. It ramps hard. When it first comes out, the Incubation Druid can only tap for 1 mana. That mana, interestingly enough, can be any color which could be produced by a land you control. If you control a land like Unclaimed Territory, naming anything, doesn't even matter if it's not Elf or Druid, you can still tap for mana of any color because that land can produce mana of any color. But once the Incubation Druid has a +1/+1 counter on it, you create 3 mana. There's a really fast way to get a +1/+1 counter on the Incubation Druid, and it isn't a Simic card. Stony Strength, which is definitely a Gruul card, allows you to tap the Incubation Druid to produce 1 mana, play Stony Strength on the Incubation Druid, it untaps, and now you have 3 mana at your disposal. It's quite a trick. Ravnica Allegiance also introduced a card called Growth Spiral to help you ramp. This card costs 2 mana and lets you draw a card and then put a land from your hand directly onto the battlefield. This could be a way for you to hold up mana for a counter spell and then use this at the end of your opponent's turn to get down the land, or you could just use this on your turn to get more lands down or to draw a card. Speaking of spirals, the Gyre Engineer generates exactly the right mana to cast Growth Spiral. This card seems like a great way to ramp in 2 colors at the same time. There's also a card in Simic that makes your creature's activated abilities cost less. The Biomancer's Familiar wants to give you some delicious goo. A lot of Simic's creatures have an activated ability, Adapt. This Familiar makes the cost to adapt lower, while also allowing these creatures to adapt multiple times. Normally, once a creature has a +1/+1 counter from any source on it, it's unable to adapt, but the Biomancer's Familiar allows you to adapt again and again and again, and accumulate as many +1/+1 counters you want at a discount. So why should you adapt? There are a couple creatures that give advantages to all creatures that have +1/+1 counters on them. For example, the Skatewing Spy. Every creature that has a +1/+1 counter on it has flying when a Skatewing Spy is in play. And the Trollbred Guardian, same thing, but instead it's trample. Zagana, Utopian Speaker, also gives your creatures that have +1/+1 counters on them trample, but she does a whole lot more than that. You might remember Zagana as the former Prime Speaker of Simic. Now she's the Utopian Speaker. When Zagana enters the battlefield, if any of your creatures have +1/+1 counters on them, you get to draw a card. Also, she's able to adapt to go from a 4/4 for 4 mana to an 8/8. Because she gives herself trample, that's a pretty impressive creature. In the same vein of creatures that give additional abilities to other creatures that have +1/+1 counters on them, the Herald of Secret Streams from Ixalan makes your creatures with +1/+1 counters unblockable. I could see that card being played with a lot of other creatures that have Adapt. Ravnica Allegiance also gives you a way to win the game purely through counter manipulation. Simic Ascendancy gives you a source of +1/+1 counters at instant speed. Every time you move or give a creature a +1/+1 counter, you put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 20 or more of these growth counters on Simic Ascendancy, you win the game. 20 counters might sound like a lot, but with the Galloping Lizrog, you can move counters and double them at the same time. When the Galloping Lizrog enters the battlefield, you get to move as many +1/+1 counters from creatures you control onto the Galloping Lizrog. And when that happens, you get twice as many of those counters. And if you remove all the counters from a creature that has Adapt, you can adapt it again. I really like that this card is a Galloping Lizrog, and its creature type is a frog lizard. The Simic Biomancer that came up with that name was not very creative. If you were worried about your Galloping Lizrog not being enough to trigger Simic Ascendancy's win condition, Biogenic Upgrade can fix that for you. Biogenic Upgrade is a 6-mana sorcery speed spell, which allows you to distribute 3 +1/+1 counters onto up to 3 creatures you control, and then double the number of counters on each of those creatures. Imagine doubling the number of counters on a Galloping Lizrog, or a Hungering Hydra, or Grun, the Lonely King. For fun's sake, let's do the math. If a kicked Grun enters the battlefield with 5 +1/+1 counters on it, we add 3 +1/+1 counters, then double the total amount. Grun becomes a 21/21 creature, and a 42/42 creature if he attacks alone. Would you rather make your board go wide than go big? The Biogenic Ooze might be the right thing to choose. When Biogenic Ooze enters the battlefield, you get to create a second 2/2 green Ooze creature token. And then, at the beginning of every ebb step, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on every ooze you control. By the way, Vanifar is an ooze. Biogenic Ooze can also create more oozes at the low cost of 4 mana. I could also see some shenanigans happening if you were to turn everything into an ooze using Arcane Adaptation. Still need more +1/+1 counters in your life? How about some of these other cards from the set that have Adapt? The card with the coolest name in this set is definitely Shark to Crab. This Sharknado of a creature is also pretty good. It's a 4/4 for 4 mana, and putting a +1/+1 counter on this creature taps down an opponent's creature and keeps it tapped for a turn. Also, the Shark to Crab is a fish, octopus, and a crab, all in one. That's a lot of seafood. The Scuttlegator gets the cutest name award. This is a 6/6 for 6, but it has Defender until it gets a +1/+1 counter on it. Skitter Eel looks delicious. Also, it has Adapt, so we should mention it here. Same with the Sauroform Hybrid. This one doesn't look delicious. In fact, it kind of looks like that picture of Bigfoot that's so well circulated, only it's not blurry. Aeromonculus is another one of the adaptable creatures. It's a 2/3 flyer for 3. It's nothing too interesting, but being able to have a creature and then put more mana into it to adapt it is pretty nice. This next adaptable creature costs only 1 mana to play. It's the Pteramander. This is a Salamander Drake, 1/1 blue flying creature. It has an adapt cost of 8 mana, so it's very unlikely you'll be adapting this unless the game is at a near standstill. Let's take a moment to admire its art. I don't really know where the drake part of the salamander drake fits in. To me, this looks more like a salamander frog. Did someone used to call him on his cell phone? There's one other 1-cost blue creature with Adapt, the Benthic Biomancer. This card costs 1 to play, it's a 1/1, but you can pay 2 mana to adapt it. When you adapt this creature, you draw a card and then discard a card. This can be really useful for early game filtering. This card is an elf crab warrior. It's green like a Llanowar elf, has 2 power like a Wishcoin crab, and it throws cucumbers like the Volley veteran. It's the Growth Chamber Guardian. It's a 2/2 creature for 2, but it has an adapt cost of 3. And whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put onto Growth Chamber Guardian, you can search your deck for Growth Chamber Guardian. This seems like an easy way to fill your board with small creatures. This card might have a place in Elf Tribal, because hey, it's an elf. Crab warrior. The Simic have done a great job showing us how adaptable they are. They've also given us a way to manipulate all those +1/+1 counters that we get because of Adapt. The Combined Guildmage lets you get counters on creatures entering the battlefield or move counters from one creature to another. I could imagine using this ability before playing a large number of token creatures. And now I'd like to take a break from saying the words +1/+1 counters so I can tell you guys about the Frilled Mystic. This guy crashes every party. She's got flash, she's got scales, she's even got the greatest creature type in all of Simic. Elf, lizard, wizard. Maybe she's a fan of King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. Or she just likes countering things. When Frilled Mystic enters the battlefield, you can counter a target spell. This is very similar to the old card, Mystic Snake. And that makes sense. That was a Simic card, this is a Simic card. The last creature card from this set I'm going to talk about isn't quite as interesting. This is the Steeple Creeper. I'm going to call this guy the Steeple Creeper, and nobody can stop me. He's got a high power, low toughness, and the ability to jump from tall buildings. I don't really know why frogs on Ravnica keep having flying. Leapfrog in the previous set had this as well. I just hope it doesn't splatter when it hits the sidewalk. And those are all of the Simic Combine's creatures in Ravnica Allegiance. Now we can talk about some of the sorceries, instants, and enchantments that I breezed over before. The first of these spells is Regenesis. It's costly, but it can bring back 2 permanents at instant speed. This spell being able to target planeswalkers or enchantments makes it extremely versatile. The next spell is Essence Capture. This is a creature counter spell. With Essence Capture, when you counter a creature spell, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on one of your own creatures. It does cost 2 blue mana, which is the same cost as Essence Scatter, the other creature-specific counter spell in Standard, but the counter-related upside may make this a staple in creature-oriented blue decks. Applied Biomancy is pretty much 2 spells in one. It costs 1 green mana and 1 blue mana, and at instant speed, you get to choose to do one or both things. You can either give +1/+1 until end of turn to target creature, or you could return target creature to its owner's hand. I could see a lot of situations where you'd want to do both. Incubation and Incongruity don't let you cast both sides at the same time, but you can choose between 2 pretty nice effects. For 1 mana, you can look for a creature card in the top 5 cards of your deck, or for 3 mana, you get to turn something into a frog lizard. What could be better than instant speed lizardification? As a note, you can cast this on your own creatures. If you have a Llanowar elf that suddenly needs to be a 3/3 for blocking, why buff it when you can just get a frog lizard? It's way better. Something we haven't seen a lot of yet is card draw. The Simic card Guardian Project is card draw for creature-oriented decks. The more diverse your creature pool is, the better this card gets, because every time you cast a creature that you don't already have a copy of in the field or in the graveyard, you get to draw a card. This card is a must-have in green singleton decks. The next card is also an enchantment. It plays a lot like an instant spell. Slimebind has flash, which means you can cast it at any time, including during your opponent's turn. This enchantment gives -4/-0 to enchanted creature. And that's the last of the Simic Combined spells in Ravnica Allegiance. There are also 3 different lands which are associated with Simic. You've got the Breeding Pool, and then 2 different Simic Guild Gates. Breeding Pool is what's called a shock land. It is both a forest and an island, and when it comes into play, you can pay 2 life to have it come in untapped. The Simic Guild Gates always come in tapped. All 3 of these lands generate green and blue mana to help you cast your Simic spells. I hope you've enjoyed this guide on all the Simic cards in Ravnica Allegiance. There's a poll on my Twitter, linked below, asking which guild we should talk about next. Want to see more content like this? I stream almost every day on twitch.tv/Amazonian. I hope to see you there. Bye!